Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for having me here. During the first millennium BCE, the Mediterranean was a vast networking area for economic, intercultural interactions among a mosaic of people: Phoenicians, Etruscans, Greeks, and many others. Mainly from the late 8th century to the end of the 4th century BCE, exchanges between Greece and Etruria formed a significant part of this system. Pottery was far from being the most economically important type of goods to be traded across the sea, but Greek vases, massively distributed around the Mediterranean and exported to Etruria, are the most tangible witnesses to these complex economic exchanges and networks. The abundance of Greek vases in Etruria can be explained, at least in part, because the Etruscan elite adopted and adapted a Greek wine-drinking custom called symposion. For their own ritual banquets, mingling their traditional vessel repertoire with Greek, especially Attic symphotic sets. Unlike the Athenians, Etruscan elite members were buried with their mixed drinking set long after the Archaic period, protecting the vases in their graves for more than 2 millennia. For decades, scholarship analyzed this relation, its economic, artistic, and cultural impact from a predominantly Greek perspective, considering the Etruscans as mere receptors of an acculturating Greek civilization. Today, archaeologists tend to pay more attention to Etruscan agency and impact on the production and trade of Greek vases, unveiling complex and multi-layered interactions between the two regions. Bearing in mind Joseph Noble's interest for pottery techniques, my talk will deal with 4 or 5 case studies. It depends on the time. You can stop me at the 4th one. So case studies of mutual inspirations between Etruria and Greece, testifying to the high degree of complexity of such exchanges. The title of my talk was borrowed to Stendhal's novel with the intention to reflect the bright contrasting colors of Attic and Etruscan black figure pottery and the dark shine of Bouquereau and black glaze. But we will end up discussing other productions too, covering a wide chronological span. And before diving into our topic, a very general and brief reminder of a few Etruscan facts can be helpful, I think. Etruria was divided into independent city-states that were never united. As in Greece, each city-state had an urban center surrounded by a territory, and each one had its own cultural characteristics. We could define Etruria as a common cultural entity and certainly not a political one. Etruria is also defined by its territorial permanence, and in a very general way, we can say that the Etruscans shared the same language, which is not an Indo-European language, a religion and common ancestors, the onomastic system, that is the corpus of names, of family names, a common cultural development in general, and according to ancient authors, the Etruscans themselves had the feeling of having a common history that started around the 11th century BCE, which is more or less confirmed by archaeology. They shared a corpus of books, chronicles, annals, and stories. And finally, they probably used the ethnonym Razna to name themselves. And so here is the map of Etruria. And usually we divide it into regions. So the core of Etruria is today's Tuscany and the north of Latium, the region of Rome. There is southern Etruria with the cities of Vulci, Tarquinia, and Cerveteri, or Caere and Veii. We speak about northern Etruria for those northern cities up to Pisa, central Etruria around Chiusi, and then there is an expansion zone in the Po Valley. The Po River is here. And the main cities of the Po Valley are Bologna, its ancient name is Felsina, and also Spina. And then there is an extension zone in southern Italy around Naples, around Capua, more or less. In terms of chronology, the history of the Etruscan people covers more or less the first millennium BC. With a protohistoric, understand pre-writing phase called Villanovan, from the 10th century to the second half to the middle of the 8th century. Then follows the so-called Orientalizing period from the late 8th and through the 7th century, dominated by the powerful princely aristocracies who adopted writing to express their status. During the Archaic period, so the 6th century, the more articulated organization of the cities and the increase of trade led the political and economic rise of a sort of middle class. Intensification of trade with Greece brought a sharp rise in the imports of Attic pottery, especially in the southern Etruscan cities located along the Tyrrhenian coast, so especially in this region, with Cerveteri, Tarquinia, and Vulci. The classical period is marked by the Battle of Cumae in 474 BCE in the Bay of Naples, and the collapse of these southern Etruscan cities against an alliance of Cumae and Syracusa, two Greek colonies. This event profoundly disturbed the trading routes, cancelling the long-distance traffics with the Tyrrhenian coast and creating the growth of trade in the Adriatic and the centers of Etruria Padana, mainly to the Etruscan city of Spina. Today, the Museum of Ferrara keeps the material found in thousands of graves from the necropolis of Spina, and it constitutes what John Beazley, the great British scholar, thought to be the biggest collection of Attic red figure vases in the world. And our investigations today will not go beyond that period. So if you have never been to Ferrara, please go, because it's amazing. Our first case is a wonderful impasto ascos from the Museum of Bologna, dated to the late 8th century and early 7th century BCE. It allows us to consider the protohistoric times for a moment, the Villanovan period. This object was found in a warrior tomb in Bologna, the ancient Felsina, in the Po Valley. This strange vase is made in a terracotta fabric called impasto, the common courseware of Etruria and generally of the Italic people derived from the Bronze Age. It is an everyday life material. And I am presenting here examples of impasto ware showing the continuity from the Middle and Late Bronze Age to the left, at the left, to the final Bronze Age, which is called the Proto-Villanovan period in the center, to the early Iron Age, so the Villanovan period on the right with the two urns covered with helmets. And these characteristic biconical urns were used as cinerary containers in graves. During the Villanovan period, impasto was handmade. As soon as the 9th century on, impasto was sometimes highly decorated and refined, emphasizing the growing role of banquet practices, wine production, and wine drinking, and highlighting the prestige of the elite using those vessels. Note that these practices developed before arrival of the Greeks in the region. Impasto vases could be then inlaid with bronze, silver, and even amber inserts. So here is an impasto urn decorated with impressions, and here with paint. Here you have bronze buttons, and on these kantharos from Verrucchio, there are bronze and silver buttons. And this one is really amazing. It's a kantharos from Verrucchio, it's near Rimini. And you can see that there are two amber inserts. The impasto repertoire of shapes was originally connected with the subalpine European area, characterized by the Bronze Age material cultures called the Urnfield facies and then the Hallstatt facies. These are the Proto-Celtic culture, we could sum up like this. Etruria remains strongly connected with the cultural and economic sphere of that European region, until the mid-8th century BCE, before resolutely turning towards the Mediterranean and strongly interacting with Greece. However, early connections with the Aegean can be detected in the material culture in this period preceding strong contacts with the Mediterranean, as attested by a small Etruscan group of about 20 animal-shaped vases dated between the late 9th century and the early 7th century. The Bologna ascos is one of them. An ascos is a shape inspired by a wineskin. Here, as on other examples, the body takes the shape of a hybrid creature, a sort of water bird like a duck, and you can see that the wings are detailed with incisions, with 3 legs and a kind of bull's head with long curved horns. Here is another earlier example from Tarquinia dated to the 9th century in the Museum of Florence. It is certain that this group of locally made objects takes after terracotta models from the Aegean, Cypriot, and Levantine regions. And here is a Cypriot example, where zoomorphic ascoi have existed since 1400 to 1200, so the Cypriot Bronze Age. Some examples, such as this Italo-geometric version from the warrior tomb of Tarquinia, now in Berlin, with a horse head on a bird body. It's a creature called a Hypalectrion, derives from proto-geometric Cretan models of Mycenaean ascendants. And here is an example from Crete, from the Museum of Heraklion. Iconographic, maybe symbolic connections between Aegean and Etruscan regions are probably at stake to explain the existence of the Etruscan group, but they still need to be investigated. Scholars assume that the transmission of these objects would have taken place via the Phoenician routes between the final Bronze Age and the Iron Age. And here is a Phoenician example, which was discovered in Carthage, so a Phoenician city, but far in the west. As you see, contacts were already very complex and intertwined in this very early period. Our second case is an Etrusco-Corinthian crater, a big vase for mixing wine and water. It's called the Cratere dei Gobbi, so the crater of the Hunchback people, after the appearance of some figures on its body. So like this figure here. It was found in the Etruscan city of Cerveteri in the south. This case brings us in the realm of Etruscan painted pottery. These productions all developed from Greek influence since the geometric period. Major Greek pottery classes such as geometric, Corinthian, black and red figure have an Etruscan counterpart, which we called Etrusco-Corinthian, Etruscan black figure, Etruscan red figure, etc. Regarding pottery, contacts with the Greeks created radical technological changes, such as much refined clay fabrics, the use of the potter's wheel, painted decoration, a strong tendency to figuration, the human figure, and better firing processes. Such technical shifts could not be triggered only by imports of Greek material. They were also driven by the presence of immigrated Greek potters who operated in workshops that were locally developed with or taken over by local craftsmen. Their Etruscan painted pottery classes are not mere copies of the Greek ones, and various types of interactions are at stake. During the 7th century, Etruscan painted pottery developed in the eclectism of the so-called Orientalizing style, with its plethora of motifs originating in the Levant, Assyria, Egypt, Cyprus, etc. So it's a lot of animals and flowers, etc. Imports of Greek ceramics in Etruria were mainly Corinthian at that period, but also came from East Greece, often called Ionia, Crete, the Cyclades, and elsewhere. Etrusco-Corinthian ware was developed in southern Etruria. Elite graves were filled with both imported and local vases, as in this example from Cerveteri. Here, a comparison of a Corinthian Olpe and an Etrusco-Corinthian one, so you have a better idea. Instead of focusing on style and techniques, I would like to concentrate on early mythological representations in Etruscan art, at least just for this case. First manifestations of Greek mythological scenes appeared in Etruria between the late 8th century and the first quarter of the 6th. These representations are very few, and they are found only on painted productions, on Etruscan painted productions, not on Greek vases. The scenes are always difficult to interpret, especially from a Greek textual or literary point of view. They express both a desire to depict Greek mythology and a tendency to introduce various original elements. On the other hand, no representation of local Etruscan mythology can be detected with clarity in that period. Etruscan elites and painters of the 7th century were keen to display and to appropriate Greek myth, but reinterpreted them in a local manner. Now, the so-called Hunchback crater, let's call it like this, is a good example of these ambiguous representations. Bruno D'Agostino, who proposed a study of that piece, rightly declared it scoglio dell'iconografia etrusca, meaning the stumbling block of Etruscan iconography. Only 3 figures painted on the crater are truly identifiable: Heracles, Geryon, and a centaur, perhaps Pholos. All 3 are depicted in the main scene around the body, divided into 3 episodes that are difficult to connect. And now I will describe them from right to left. So on one side of the vase, here underlined in green, Heracles is hidden behind a tree and aiming an arrow at the giant warrior Geryon, who was made of 3 bodies connected at the waist. So Heracles is here, here is the tree, and you see that Geryon has too many legs, a shield and a spear. Heracles killed Geryon for one of his 12 labors in order to take possession of his beautiful cattle. On the vase, we can see Geryon's multiple feet and his herd extending under one handle, so to the right. Note that the story happened in the far west, on an island near the columns of Hercules, so it really is a story of the far west. The second scene, underlined in red, is located under the other handle. A centaur, perhaps Pholos, is facing a cloaked figure. The centaur holds a staff in one hand and a large black kantharos in the other. The figure, depending on interpretations, is seen either as a man or a woman. In fact, we do not really know what is happening in this scene, but it looks rather solemn, especially with the kantharos. Even if the identification of Pholos is dubious, we can tell that the centaur looks rather wise and composed, which is exceptional for such a creature, and would advocate for the identification with Pholos or an otherwise centaur, Chiron. The strange bird-like monster flying above has been interpreted by Marina Martelli as a Stymphalian bird, another of the 12 labors, but nothing proves it. The other side, underlined in blue, has been interpreted as a human sacrifice, that of a woman, carried by a warrior on his shoulders. So it's the scene here. She is here, and these are the legs of the warrior. He is climbing the stairs of an altar, at the top of which sits a bearded head of a man, perhaps with a snake or a carp body. Here is the body, or we think it is, or his real body is hidden by the steps. We don't really know. The group is preceded by a cloaked woman holding an object, perhaps a phallus or a kind of bowl for a libation. Behind her is a galloping horseman. On the vase's shoulder, there is another sacrifice, this one of a bull being led towards a stepped altar by a sort of priest with pointed hat. Behind this man was another figure, perhaps Heracles, according to D'Agostino, so this figure. And it is true that the way his hair is incised looks a little bit like Heracles on the body. This is Heracles. But it also looks like the centaur's hairdress. So I don't know if it's Heracles, a centaur, or somebody else. A horseman and a bird follow. On the altar, a figure is seated, interpreted as male and bearded. This person holds a round object. So here. The mythological context at play is closely related to the Tyrrhenian characteristics of Heracles. In Rome and in Etruria, the hero, Heracles, was perceived as a civilizing figure who brought the practice of pious sacrifice, that of animals, and put an end to the old practice of impious sacrifice, that of humans, as in the Roman tradition of the Saturnalia. In the Western world, there is often a strong connection between the killing of Geryon and the centauromachy, and also between Heracles and the centaurs. So the old vase, even though we don't understand it, is connected with Heracles. The difficulty to connect the various scenes of the creator is not due to an Etruscan lack of knowledge of the Greek myth. On the contrary, when we sum up many examples of these complicated mythological representations, or at least complicated for us, we realize that the original Greek myth must have been very well known in the West, so the local painters and their clients could adapt and appreciate the episodes that were more meaningful to them, and they could also add their own variants and episodes. They were able to create images, new images, and specific moments of the myth that sometimes do not exist as such in the Greek repertoire. In my opinion, the scene with the centaur, so here under the handle, connects the two others. First, because of its position under the handle, so it's a transitional location on the vase. And second, because the presence of the wise centaur connects with the world of Heracles. Maybe also if it's a Stymphalian bird represented above the centaur, then it's another connection with Heracles. Also, the kantharos in the Attic iconography is a vase for heroes, among which Heracles, long before becoming the vase of Dionysus. The scene could be also connected to the two sacrificial scenes because of the gesture of the figure offering a round object, which is repeated on the shoulder. So this gesture and this one. But it is impossible at this stage to say more than that, and the overall vase remains very mysterious. Our third case is the most complex one. It forces us to look back at the end of the Villanovan period to understand the later developments of Etruscan bouquereau making, its Mediterranean diffusion, mainly through the shape of the kantharos, and the reception of the shape in Greece, especially Boeotia and Attica. The Etruscan kantharos came into being at a time of very strong intensification of relations between the Villanovans, the Near Eastern travelers, and the Greeks. With the increasing complexity of commensal practices, so wine drinking practices, both local and intercultural. The kantharos was created on the basis of the one-handled cup, which you might call the kiatos, but for such old periods we don't call it kiatos. Let's say one-handled cup. It is a traditional italic shape inherited from the Bronze Age, to which a second handle was added. This happened around the middle of the 8th century. So we are here. After the first prestigious late Villanovan variants made in impasto, the handles became elevated, like here. And the bowl became more articulated, made of various geometric volumes. I believe that the kantharos, just as it took up the architectural aspects of the kiathos, carried on the ancient local traditions of wine consumption, while also integrating them with practices and vases that came from the outside, such as the Greek symposium. Considering Bouguereau more specifically, the kantharos type Rasmussen 3E, sorry for the name, so this one, the black one, created from the late 7th to the mid-6th century BCE, traveled far enough from Etruria to be the most widespread Etruscan archaeological find in the Mediterranean world. So this is a distribution map of Bouguereau in the Mediterranean, but most of that Bouguereau is only represented by the kantharos. There are a few other shapes. This vase had to be recognized, at least in major international trading places, as an object, perhaps as a symbol from Etruria. While Bouguereau is most abundant in the western part of the sea, it traveled in many sites of the Aegean, where it is found in a large number of Greek sites, such as Corinth, Peracora, Delos, Chios, Samos, Miletus, etc. In these Aegean sites, Etruscan Bouguereau, mainly kantharoi, were found in a variety of contexts, mainly tombs and votive deposits in big sanctuaries. Between the 50s and the 80s, French scholars Paul Courbin, François Villard, and Michel Gras demonstrated that the complicated profile of the attic of the Athenian kantharos, here on the left, the type of John Beazley called A1, was inspired by the Etruscan Bouguereau kantharos type Rasmussen 3E, so the kantharos we just saw. In the Attic repertoire, the shape appears suddenly and without direct precedent in black figure technique around 570 BCE. Attic black figure and red figure kantharoi are very rare. They are not standardized, and often they are very spectacular because of their size, which can be very monumental, and because of the complex scenes depicted on their body, and usually by major painters. In 2005, and we are here now, Karl Kiliński noted that the same Etruscan Bouguereau kantharos also inspired the prolific production of Boeotian kantharoi. Contrary to Attica, an earlier shape existed with two vertical handles and a deep bottom in the Boeotian repertoire. It was a very important local shape, developed in a continuous line since the geometric period, then in black figure. But during the 6th century, this traditional shape with a deep bottom was strongly influenced by the Etruscan Bouguereau version. Kiliński has suggested an independent reception of the Etruscan model in Boeotia and in Attica. But in 2020, my friend Isabelle Algrin showed that the Attic kantharos seems rather to imitate the Boeotian type, which is in turn inspired by the Bouguereau. I hope you follow. Striking for their strong resemblance to the Bouguereau kantharos are the two black painted vessels found in a domestic context at Delphi and dated to the late 7th and early 6th century BCE. Not only are they black and shiny like the Bouguereau, even though it is a very different technique, but one of them also imitates the diamond notches that mark the carination of Bouguereau models. So those two were found in Delphi and they are black glazed, so covered. And you can see the tiny dots here. And this is a very typical feature of the Bouguereau, of the Etruscan Bouguereau. And we call that diamond notches. So it's clearly imitating the Bouguereau. Isabelle Algrin convincingly attributed the two vases from Delphi to a Boeotian black glaze fabric production on the basis of numerous morphological parallels, such as this one from Adolphe, which is also black glaze. In Boeotia, the kantharos was used as a funerary offering, as a symphotic vessel, so for the wine drinking parties. You see here a banqueter is reclining with his kantharos, so it was really a drinking vessel, and then it went into the grave. But it was also a votive offering, and we find it in the sanctuary of the Kabirion in Boeotia. In Attica, in Athens, sacred vessel, the kantharos was a sacred vessel for votive offering in sanctuaries, and maybe it was even a liturgical tool. In Etruria, the bucero kantharoi were used more or less like in Boeotia, so a drinking vessel, then deposited in the graves, and sometimes in sanctuaries. The scene that we observed on the Hunchback crater with the centaur and the kantharos seems very ceremonial. In my opinion, the kantharos aura of solemnity was shared in Etruria, Boeotia, and Attica, even if the precise uses did differ. It is a very international shape, and its uses and symbolic were formed in a context of interculturality and exchanges. In Etruscan black figure vase painting, kantharoi like the one here in Tampa, I don't know if you recognize it, it's very small, they are very rare, probably because this pottery style started when the shape was starting its slow disappearance from the banquet sets of Etruria to be confined to funerary and sacred contexts only. So I think that at this stage it was less and less used in the banquets. The noble kantharos can be attributed to one of the earliest Etruscan workshops of black figure, called the Pontic group, which was most probably located in Vulci and operated between 540 and 510. The shape with its low cup is closer to the contemporary bucero variants, as is the case for other Etruscan painted kantharoi. However, the verticality of the handle's upper attachment here and the location of the black glaze zones like the foot, the bottom, and the handles is reminiscent of Attic experiences. So the painters and the potters were aware of everything, of the local production and the imports from Athens. After that short-lived Etruscan black figure production, kantharoi became very small, sometimes miniature, made in impasto and fine unpainted ware. Under this reduced form, they survived at least until the 4th century, mostly in votive contexts. And these are two votive pits which were discovered in northern Italy. Until the end, this extraordinary, complex and multicultural shape kept something of its ceremonial, perhaps liturgical aura. Many vases in the Tampa collection took part in the long story of exchanges between Etruria and Athens, and I selected two of them, both from the Noble collection, to briefly discuss exports of Attic black figure to southern Etruria. On the left is a typical example of the Tyrrhenian amphora here. I didn't see it today. A group of Attic jars named after the Tyrrhenian Sea bordering the southern Etruscan coast, well, the Etruscan coast, where these objects were predominantly found. Manufactured between 570 and 530, Tyrrhenian amphorae are the first tangible sign of a specific adaptation in the Attic vase production to Etruscan taste and market. They appeared during the crucial period in which Athens supplanted Corinth's monopoly on the vase market for the West. Even if it is not perfectly accurate, this map showing the few known provenances of such amphorae doesn't need to be extensively commented. Etruria, and especially the city of Vulci, was the destination, while the type was virtually absent in Greece and didn't even interest the Athenians who were making them. However, with the Tyrrhenian amphora, Athenian potters chose a shape which resembled the ovoid form of Corinthian amphorae. So here is a Corinthian amphora, and here is the Tampa vase, and you can see that it has the same spirit. Athenian painters also selected within their own repertoire an iconography which reminded the Corinthian animal friezes, very popular in Etruria. The so-called Pontic amphora, here on the right, is an Etruscan black figure production from the city of Vulci, as the black figure kantharos we just saw. Dated 20 to 30 years later than the Tampa vase, it shows the persistence of the shapes and the animal friezes' success in Etruria, while such elements were rather out of fashion in Athens to that point. The other vase in Tampa, on the right, is a black figure Attic oinokoe, a wine jug dated to about 520 and 500. It is representative of hundreds of similar vases exported from Athens to Etruria. This one was found during the excavations of Vulci's necropolis by Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon's younger brother, who had to live there in Italy and couldn't go back to France because he had married his love, Alexandrine, and Napoleon was very upset about it. What is remarkable about the object is the fainted painted mark underneath the foot, a sigma and an omicron. This is a trademark. Attic vases were transported from Greece to the west by merchants coming mainly from Greek cities, mostly eastern Greece, but also from Aegina and perhaps Athenians. These merchants left discrete marks incised, they are called graffiti, or painted like this one, dipinti, on numerous Attic vases found in Etruria. Greek dedications deposited in the sanctuaries of Pyrgi and Gravisca in southern Etruria were certainly, and for the most part, left by these traveling traders. One of them is well known from a passage in Herodotus, which I put on the slide. The wealthy Sostratos of Aegina, active from about 530 and 500. As luck would have it, traces of his activity have been found in archaeology, or so we like to think, as some identify the frequent SO mark, so our mark here, as to his activities, to Sostratos' activities. Also, a dedication to Apollo of Aegina by a man called Sostratos, engraved on a marble anchor fragment, was discovered in the sanctuary of Gravisca, the port of Tarquinia. The distribution of trademarks shows that merchants didn't just deal with specific Attic workshops. They distributed everything made in Athens and played a decisive role in the targeted distribution of these vases. And now I don't know if we have the time for the last one. No? Okay. So you can come to the Met because this is a loan from Ferrara. And I already talked about Ferrara at the beginning, so just because it's gorgeous. That's the landscape now. And the city was like that, the necropolis, the tomb, and you will see everything at the Met. Okay, so there is no space for a conclusion with this topic. Every year, archaeologists find new evidence to the complexity of intercultural networks in the ancient Mediterranean. And regarding vases, there is so much more to discover about the triangle uniting Etruria, Attica, but also Latium and Magna Graecia, which we couldn't even touch today. I think that the main novelty in this branch of the research regards the question of the impact of the Etruscan market on Attic production, which was until recently and still is sometimes denied by scholars. So, the ancient world was highly connected, more than we think. It's about all the stories and adventures those vases witnessed. Thank you.